This is the Contagious Faith Podcast.
Welcome to the Contagious Faith Podcast, where we bring you real stories, bold leaders, and challenging questions for global revival. I'm your host, Gabriel Jackson. Let's go. All right, Eugene, how you doing?
Great, man. Great to be with you. Thank you so much for the invite. Good to see your face again.
Yeah, you as well. Thank you so much. You know, just for some context, I was thinking about this. I was like, how do I describe Eugene? And I was like, those that may not know you, those that may not be familiar yet with Back to Jerusalem. And I was thinking, you know, you're some combination of Jason Bourne and like a non-sleazy James Bond, right? So, somewhere in this combo is Eugene Bach. So it's so good to have you, man. You know, it's actually rare. I was thinking about this too. We've spent some time together face to face, which is actually kind of a miracle given how much you travel. Thank you. You've been in my home. We've had some steak together if I'm remembering correctly. And in all seriousness, I think that you have a very interesting life. So I'm hoping to kind of mine the depths of what it is you do at Back to Jerusalem. You know, your signature line says troublemaker in chief. So I love that. You're going to have to explain, you know, some of that, but man, it's so good to have you. So I wanted to just maybe start today with what is Back to Jerusalem? How are you connected? Like whatever you want to share along those lines, and we'll dive in.
Yeah, you know, for the last 25 years, a little bit more than 25 years now, I've been working together with the underground church in China. And they have really been working on this vision that I have just had the privilege of tagging along. So I don't arrange anything. I'm not a manager of anything. I'm not a director of anything. I don't orchestrate anything. I'm just working together with the underground church as they focus on this vision that they call Back to Jerusalem. And essentially, it is the fulfillment of the Great Commission. So if you look at a map, you can see that the gospel has primarily gone in a westward direction. So there were missionaries and disciples even that went eastward. But for the most part, the gospel took root from Jerusalem and westward. So you've got this march of revival that went from Jerusalem around the world, first into Asia Minor, then into Europe and Africa, around to the Americas. And then now today it is in Asia with the world's largest revival in China, the world's largest church in South Korea. And then you have this final frontier where the gospel has yet to really pierce. And that's between China and Jerusalem. And the Chinese have this vision called Back to Jerusalem, where God is raising up 100,000 missionaries to take the gospel from China to all of the nations between China and Jerusalem, going from nation to nation, village to village, person to person. It's basically just the completion of the Great Commission.
Wow. Okay. So how did you get connected with the movement? When did that start for you?
Yeah, for me, it happened around 98, 99. So I was living in Southern California. I was working for a police department in San Marcos, California. And my wife, who grew up on the mission field, she was born and raised in Sweden, but her parents became missionaries at a very young part of her life. So they moved from Sweden to Taiwan first and then to Hong Kong, where they were really focused on doing evangelism among the Chinese. And in 1999, I had the distinct privilege to meet together with a Chinese evangelist by the name of Brother Yun. And he wasn't very well known at that time, but about 4 years after that, a book came out about his life called The Heavenly Man. And I think that might be the most widely sold book about any Chinese evangelist in the history of Christianity. And he really did make a huge impact on my life. My wife and I absolutely loved meeting together with him. And we were invited at that time to come and work together with the Chinese evangelists. And I had a period of time where I was going through university and I was working at a police department. And I had a break where I could take off a semester. And so my wife and I took that semester and we moved to China at the end of 99, beginning of 2000. And it was then that we decided, you know what? Nothing else. Like, why am I going to school? Why am I like, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I didn't bring any skills, right? I didn't go through Bible school. I wasn't a missionary or a pastor or an evangelist. I was a nobody, and I just wanted to serve. And that's kind of, when I say troublemaker in chief, as you know, that's my job description. The reason I've chosen that is because it's kind of chosen for me. I don't really have a job. I never have. My job has always been to do whatever is needed, whatever is directly in front of me. You know, I'm just a basic, water boy, tall boy, whatever people need for the team. That's what I do. That's what I provide. I can remember, I think it was last year, I was on TBN in the UK, and I was asked, they asked very strongly before I did a couple of programs with a really good friend of mine, and they said, hey, we need your title at Back to Jerusalem. And I was like, I don't have one. They're like, well, we need something. I said, troublemaker in chief. And they're like, that's funny. No, really? Like, seriously. I was like, seriously, I do not have a title. If that keeps me from doing an interview, then I'm not going to be able to do an interview because I don't have a title. I simply don't. I don't run anything. I'm not in charge of anything. I'm not a CEO. I'm not a manager. I'm not a director. I'm just a servant. And those that I work together with, they're the same. If you've ever worked with the underground house church inside of China, none of them go by pastor, evangelist, director, apostle. None of them all of them go by one word, brother. Brother Yun, probably one of the most well-known Chinese evangelists in the world, goes by Brother Yun. And so I've really loved serving with the underground house church. And in many ways, I've kind of adopted their DNA. And so that's played a part in me just refusing to take, a title in the traditional sense.
Yeah. Well, I love that. And I laugh because it is unique. And I also know that, given your past and certain skills that you do have from military and different things that you have done, that, you are put in some intense situations and you have a lot of very interesting stories. I've heard some of them. And, but I love that heart posture, Eugene. And I think it's very refreshing. And I think it's probably surprising, right, to a lot of people, because I know that you do a lot of traveling, you're speaking, you're writing books on behalf of the organization and other things. There's a lot going on, right? But yet there's that humility that you carry. And I think you guys have caught that DNA. And I remember even when Brother Yun and your father-in-law came to Vancouver, Washington, and, we had them set up at a church here. I remember the first time seeing Brother Yun, and I had read Heavenly Man, and of course, anyone I think who reads that book, there's this admiration that you start to carry for Brother Yun, like his journey and the persecution and all of that. And then you see him in person and everything's being translated, from Chinese to English, but just the humility. I've never seen this. At the end of him speaking, he went into the crowd, he was ministering to people, and I've never seen any speaker ever do this. He gets on his knees and he wanted us to pray over him. And I was like, who is this guy? We don't see that level of genuine humility, right? The speaker comes, they're ushered in by 5 security guards. They're in a green room. They speak, they collect their huge honorariums, and then they go off and you don't see them again. And I just think you guys are so different. So anyway, I just wanted to say that for context with whoever's watching this or will watch this, that it really is unique, and it permeates through your entire organization, not just with you, but with Brother Yun and everyone else. So it is really, really fascinating. Now, you guys are working on all sorts of, if I can call it secret tech, and maybe that's the phrase I'll use for the sake of us simpletons, but you're creating all this stuff, And there's a lot of different people contributing and helping on these initiatives, but you guys have a lot of initiatives happening with the aim of getting Bibles or devices or whatever it is into prohibited areas, prohibited countries. What has that process been like for you? Like, how does that intersect with Back to Jerusalem and your heart to see revival come?
Well, I mean, you've been to our hackers conferences before, and they are really a unique situation where we bring hackers from around the world, and we basically, oftentimes we get a cabin in Tennessee, way up in the mountains, where we live together, we eat together. Nobody leaves the cabin. We're like a cult, and you just dream together. We we don't set up any meeting rooms with PowerPoint presentations and desks and speakers and formats and schedules. In fact, one of the things I love to do at our hackers conferences, or in many of our conferences that we host, is ask people, I'll walk out and I'll introduce myself and I'll say, okay, can I get everybody just really quick, pull out your agenda for today? And people look around like, am I the only one that didn't get one? They're like, where's Megan? And I'll be like, nobody got one. And just kind of a way to show people that our only agenda here is to dream. And then once we dream, to really trust in the leading of the Spirit to be able to tackle some of those dreams that I believe are supernaturally inspired. They come from God, and they are for completing the Great Commission in our lifetime. So we have these individuals who come from many different backgrounds. So we have, people that come from military intelligence and cyber warfare from Europe, America. We have NSA, CIA, FBI. We have people that come from Google and Facebook. We have those hackers that, show up at our hackers meeting wearing pajamas because they came straight from their grandmother's basement. I mean, we have people from all walks of life. And what is great is that we get people that come and they're just tears in their eyes. And they say, you know what? I was thinking about quitting my job with the NSA. I was thinking about quitting my job with my, McAfee or this tech company that I'm with, because I felt that God had called me into full-time ministry. And I'd always thought of ministry as being this role that you have to play where you're up on stage with a microphone. Either you're a pastor or a leader or a worship leader or something like that. When in the West, when we term this idea of ministry, we usually attach to it certain ideas. And in many ways, we shackle. Sometimes they are those things. I'm not taking away from those, but sometimes we shackle people that God has called with traditional ideas that keep them from fulfilling the role of that God has given to them, because they are not walking in the footsteps that God has prepared for them. Instead, they're following someone else's calling. And when they get to the destination that is supposed to make them excited, they're not excited. Why? Because their destination doesn't have their name there. They've been following someone else and someone else's calling and someone else's destination. We have often been cursed with comparing ourselves with other people. And we often, put numerical values in those comparisons. And I'm reminded of the Songs of Solomon, where the lover weeps when he sees the woman of his dreams that compares herself with the fairer maidens, that feels that her skin is too dark because, she's been working in the fields and she's not as pretty as the other women because of one reason or the other. And it breaks the heart of her lover because he sees her like no one else. And she is special just the way she is. And he loves her because she is different. And I believe that God aches when he sees us comparing ourselves to other people who are walking in their calling, and we compare our calling with their calling. And when we feel that it's not the same, we almost change who we are or try to morph into these ideas and concepts. So we have these people who come to our meetings, these hackers, and they say, thank you so much, because I thought I had to quit my job in order to be in full-time ministry. Now I realize that being at this organization, doing what I'm doing, is why I was born. I was born to get into these closed nations. I was I was born to be in this position at this company at this time to do ministry that God has called me to do. And it's really fun, for lack of a better word, to watch people come into their own and start to want to be a problem for the enemy. And we developed some really cool tools. This one I can talk about because it's not anything that we're using on the field. But we got this one guy. He's just amazing. I really love him. He will come to random meetings that I'm having. He knows that I love, beef jerky and Coke Zero. And so he'll show up to these meetings and he'll have a bag for me of like Coke Zero, beef jerky, and a bag of pork rinds.
That's right. Pork rinds. I was going to say.
Yeah. And I just love him so much. And so he comes to our hackers meeting. And so he came to one of our meetings and he was like, I just couldn't stop dreaming. And so I had this one item and he created it. And it was just inspiring. We didn't use it. We won't use it, but it's inspiring. And it was fun. He was able to take a 3D printer and create the bust of Kim Jong-un, who is the leader of North Korea. And then he had like this almost like AI communication device inside where it talks to you. So you could actually have a conversation with this bust and it would share, Kim Jong-un's bust would share with you the good news of Jesus Christ, have a conversation with you and preach about Jesus. I love it. So we have
classic.
Yes. We have these creative minds, and not just creative, but a little bit outside of the what is allowable. And I feel that's, I love watching like The Chosen, for instance, because it kind of, I know that a lot of Christians might have problems with it. But what I like about it is it shows a group of men who operate outside of the religious restrictions that were put in place by the ideas of man, that were not, put in there by God. They were not put in there by Christ. Man put them in there. And I love, working with other rebels, other individuals who are troublemakers that are causing trouble in the realms of darkness, those places where the enemy has ruled for generations and says, God is not allowed in our borders. And we say, really? We'll see about
Yeah, let's go.
We're going in. We are invading your space. We are bringing the good news. We are seeing people saved with the salvation of Jesus Christ, whether you like it or not. Who is going to create a barrier in the rivers where people are drowning for the lifeboats to come in and save people? Try it.
Wow.
It's we'll challenge you.
I love that. Yeah, that hacker event that I went to, that was phenomenal. I mean, I felt like an absolute poser the entire time. I was like, what am I doing?
Welcome to the club.
But,
yeah, welcome.
You didn't make me feel that way, but it was an amazing time and just such an amazing group of people. And you're right. There was like this shared, like such a sense of community and even family that we're doing something that's bigger than ourselves. And it's like that scripture, like for such a time as this, we're alive at this time with the technology that we have to disrupt and take ground for the kingdom of God and push back the darkness. And, one of the things that we talk about, Eugene, with United Hive is like this awakening in the body of Christ we're kind of come to a sense of awakening and recognition of what God wants to do with them personally, right? Like it's moving out of, oh yeah, like God's doing cool things in my church or my city, but what's he doing in me and through me personally? Like, have I taken my seat at the table, or have I taken my place, at the front lines of the kingdom of God? And everyone's role might look a little different, but I think that a lot of people have yet to say yes to that invitation. I'm curious, kind of going back to something you said earlier about just the growth of the underground church, the largest revivals that are happening in these very persecuted areas, whether that be China or Iran, and these areas. I'm really curious to hear your perspective, like, because you visit a lot of churches in the West. You speak at churches, You're traveling around kind of all over the world. What is your message to the Western church about what you see God doing in some of these areas in Iran and China and so on?
One of the things that I have seen with the Underground House Church that has blown me away, and it really is the thing that I emulate, I try to share with others, and I'm hoping that we can also catch on. The reason why is what I'm seeing with the Underground Church of today really does relate and is intertwined with the first century church of the New Testament. I don't know how much your listeners have read. If I can, like, encourage them to not just read the New Testaments, but to read the writings of a guy by the name of Clement, another one by the name of Polycarp, and another one by the name of Ignatius. The reason why is that these are kind of considered the three people that followed after the disciples. So John, for instance, was the teacher. So you're talking about these are the people that sat at the feet of John. If you want to know who John taught, who went after John, one was a guy named Ignatius, another one was by the name of Polycarp, and then Peter, one of the disciples that he had, because Jesus told his disciples, go and make disciples. And that's what they did. And one of the ones for Peter was a guy by the name of Clement. And so when you read their writings, you get the same sense as you do from the authors of the New Testament, the books that were canonized. And you really start to see that in a supernatural pattern take place in the church as well. And so when I speak in the West and I try to share, the characteristics, the ideas, the values that we should mimic and emulate and see them with fresh eyes in the New Testament, it is this focus of those that need Christ outside of you. There is so much of an inward focus, I feel, in the West. This is my perspective. Not everybody will agree. But there's this really strong emphasis on who we are as individuals, as people. There's an egotistical gospel, if you will, that is a focus on self. So there's big strategy almost where people focus on my prayer life, my ministry, my needs, me to be better. So there's all these things that are wrapped around you. And so you spend a lot of time consuming materials that talk about you, how to make you better, how to focus on you, how to make your ministry better, as if there is a thing called your ministry. Whereas church in China, I see this humble group of individuals that are outwardly focused, and they really feel an urgency to reach those that have never heard the good news of Jesus Christ, that are focused on helping the poor, preaching the gospel, helping the downtrodden, those that are suffering from injustice, the widows and the orphans. And I feel that there is a poverty in that, but there is a wealth in that. Poverty being that there's not a praise of self in that situation. You're not going to walk away from those environments with your name in neon lights. You're not going to walk away with a conference where you are, this praised and worship speaker. And I'm not saying anything. We've been to many conferences where, our name is kind of in the bulletin for us to be the speaker. But those are secondary. Primary is Christ's name being exalted, so much so that those that have never heard before get to hear about him for the very first time, because the good news is only good to those that it reaches in time. Those that have never heard, that never get to hear the good news of Jesus Christ, they die without that hope. There's a misery index that most of the world today is suffering under. The area between China and Jerusalem is where we have 2/3 of the world's population. That is the majority of the world's population live in this area that is considered to be unreached. So we have a huge task in front of us, and it's an outward focus. It's one that I think, I love the Amish. We do a lot of work with the Amish. I don't know how much your audience is familiar with the Amish community in America, but the Mennonites, the Amish, the Anabaptist, when you work around those communities, which we do quite a bit of, I learn a lot from them. And one of the things that I have learned from them is that the joy of the Lord comes from the acronym, the word joy. And I never heard this. Maybe you've heard it in Sunday school. I didn't grow up in a Christian home, So this was new for me when I came into the Amish community. They told me, because I was wondering, why are you guys so stinking happy like all the time? I mean, so many things that would annoy me. Like, I don't want to get up and get a horse and a carriage ready, below zero. I want to jump in a warm car, turn the key, drive to the store, get it done. Like, that's a lot of time that they use just on basic everyday tasks.
Yeah.
And I would be ticked. I'd be angry all the time. I'd be kicking dogs and cussing at horses. And they have the joy of the Lord. And I was like, where does that come from? And they're like, the acronym JOY brings us happiness. And I was like, what is that? And they're like, Jesus first, others next, yourself last. Those three things, the very basics of happiness, are found, I believe, in the church that focuses outward instead of the ones that focus inward.
Yeah.
That's the message. That's the long version.
That's amazing, though.
If I was to share anything with the church in the West, it would be that lesson that I continue to learn. One in which I'm a slow learner. I'm also a reluctant student. And so for me, I have a lot of things on myself that I want to focus on. I like comfort. I like traveling in comfort. I don't want to wait in line when I get to the airport. I don't want to sit in an uncomfortable seat. I don't want to stay at a bad hotel. I don't want to eat bad food. I want to be recognized with respect. Give me the respect that I'm due. Like, those things are in my nature and I love them. And the church makes me ashamed of them. The church, as I'm exposed to the church in China, I fall at the feet of Christ, begging for forgiveness for a lot of these selfish things that I cling to with both hands, but have to eventually relinquish when I see what God wants for me in my life.
So when you're with them in, let's say, in China or someplace like that, and then you come and you're doing a book tour, or you're doing something in the US and you're talking about what's going on, Eugene, how have you been able to sort of check your heart? I mean, when you're interacting with others, because I would feel that it could be very easy to be frustrated, to get bitter, to all sorts of things. And it would even be potentially justified in some sense, like be justified, like we can be kind of justifiably angry or frustrated with the apathy of the church in general. How do you check your heart though? Because I've seen you around so many people interacting, and it just seems like you can kind of connect with anyone. So I'm curious what God's done in your life to allow you to do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you say that, because I don't connect with many people. I'm actually an introvert by nature. I enjoy most of my time alone, by myself. I recharge by myself. In fact, during this summer, as usually not most years, every single year, I go up into the wilderness, into the mountains for about a month by myself. And I look forward to that month, just being alone, praying, reading, writing. That's when I get a lot of my writing done. And I love being away from people. I just do. It's Paul Hathaway, who is the author of the book, The Heavenly Man, he's a writer in New Zealand. And I remember when Brother Yun went to go visit him in the South Island in New Zealand, close to his home. He lives in the middle of nowhere. His closest neighbor he only sees when his neighbor flies over his house in a helicopter. He lives in the middle of nowhere in the South Island in New Zealand. And Brother Yun went there and just went mad, because Brother Yun's a people person. And that place in the world is a nightmare for an evangelist, but it is heaven for an author. And so for me, I love to be away from people. And I cannot say that I spend a lot of time. So because we're a little bit different, our organization doesn't really approach churches that don't want us. We don't go knocking door to door for support. In fact, one of the things that I had recommended to our board in the earlier years that we pull out of the United States completely, because it's not a part of the 1040 window and we don't really have any business being there. And it was costing us funding to be able to go from church to church to share about Back to Jerusalem. However, God placed it on my heart many years ago when I took over the Back to Jerusalem offices in the U.S., is to not go to the churches with the big names, to not go in the mainstream kind of networking that people often do. There's kind of this circuit riding that you do once you become more well-known. And we've been to, most of the big churches in the U.S., you can name them, whether they're well-known, whether they're on TV, whether they're large congregations. We've been there. We've been to these fellowships, and we've absolutely loved it. But the thing that God showed me many years ago is to stop going to the churches that just have the big names, and instead only go to the places that are excited about the vision, regardless of their size.
Hey,
and
come on.
Take away all of the restrictions that would keep a small body of believers from hosting a Back to Jerusalem event. So take away, the idea of a minimum amount that you should give for an offering or some sort of fee. Take away any of the restrictions that would only apply to larger churches, not larger fellowships, and instead only go to those places where you feel that there is a vision and they desperately want you to come and share about that vision. And so we have found ourselves in the midst of fellowships in America where the people have the same DNA as us. What excites us excites them. So there's no challenge for me at all when I'm with the church in the West, because the people that I'm connecting with are insanely in love with Christ. And even though they're surrounded by people that may not be in the same boat or they're the same mind, they are that salt that is preserving the rest of the world around them, because they are on fire, they are humble, they are hungry, and we're a part of that fellowship. And I can remember there's a church that you would know, your audience would absolutely know if I shared it with you. They wanted Brother Yun to come. And it was during that time where God was wrestling with me about this, and he spoke clearly, and I shared it with our board, and our board was good with it. So I went to this very well-known, famous church, and, they had tens of thousands of people watching and attending their service. It's a massive facility, massive. So I go there, and they say, how lucky I should feel that they were able to fit us in. And when I say that we want to share about Back to Jerusalem, they inform me that there won't be time for that, nor is it proper to share on their TV channel about Back to Jerusalem, because there's a conflict of interest with their own ministry. So I was like, okay, we have books that we would also like to share. And they said, no, we have our own bookstore. We don't sell any books outside of what is in our bookstore. And I said, well, we have, some materials that we would like to give to people that want to know more about the Back to Jerusalem mission. And they're like, no, well, we can't do that either. But, just Brother Yun speaking, and in many ways, Brother Yun, is very clear that Brother Yun was a part of this revolving door of who's who of top speakers. And so by getting Brother Yun into their church, it was nothing special for them. It was just another name to show that they are kind of the who's who of Christianity. And I walked away from that, and I called up my father-in-law, and I said, I really feel that this is not for us. They're going to give a big offering. They're going to get us on TV. We're going to have an opportunity to share for about 30 minutes and preach. But this is a place where I have to call the crusade director in order to get to the secretary, in order to pass a message to the pastor, because the pastor is just too important for me to contact, Whereas the people that I work with today, I can call these pastors on the phone and say, hey, it's me, bro. And they're like, oh, dude, how you doing? We've been praying for you, blah, blah, blah. We're friends. This is not just a networking thing. This is real friendship, which I believe is needed for end time persecution.
Yes.
And when I called that church, I said, you know what? I apologize, but I just don't think that we're going to be able to do this service. I pray for your guys' church. Thank you so much. We are humbled by the invite. I didn't say anything, back. That's how I did it. They wrote back, dude, it was crazy. I was like, I had to send the email to our board. They wrote back and said, how dare you? like cancel on us? Do you know what we had to do to bring you in? You are a disservice to the Chinese. We could have gotten, so much of your stuff. Now you are screwing over the entire Chinese church because now so many people that can only learn through us won't know what you're doing. It was just, they went off, dude. They went off on me. And I was like, thank God we missed that landmine. But that was a big change for us. Now we go through, fellowships that are in homes, to, bigger, massive churches and everything in between. But it just depends on who's hungry, who wants to know. And I fit in those groups seamlessly. Those groups, I'm excited to be there. Those groups I connect with very easy. So there's no, I don't have to teach them anything. They're hungry, they want to know, and we fellowship and we benefit from an iron sharpens iron type of relationship.
Wow. Do you think, Eugene, that is it the persecution that would be the thing that, do you think it's going to take that for the Western church to shift into, more so what we see, what you're seeing in China and other countries like that? Is that a key ingredient? I mean, we see it in the book of Acts that persecution, there was like this urgency, there was a fear of God, but persecution forced people sort of to go, to spread out, to move, and not just get so comfortable in our four walls. And where so many of these churches, it does seem like it's a business enterprise. It's a business, they think like a business, they're run like a business. The culture is very business-like, and then the fruit of it, or the evaluation of its success, is businessy. And because it's businessy, it's like, well, what's the ROI on doing X, Y, and Z? And so certain things that don't look good, aren't going to get the numbers, aren't going to get the attention. They are not often prioritized, which I think is why some of the nitty-gritty evangelism on the front lines and sharing the gospel and all this kind of stuff in the darkest places is not often prioritized. It's not prioritized in budgets. It's not prioritized with what gets talked about from stage. And so, is persecution the key here that you think would shake the Western church?
I hope not. I hate persecution. For me, I wish there was a way that we can do it the easy way, that we can just learn from the Bible, the people that have already gone. I like secondary education. I don't like, I like to experience hard times through the stories of other people. I don't want to experience them myself, but one of the things that I have learned, unfortunately, at least through experience, is that comfort can be our greatest enemy. In fact, I would say comfort is the constant diet of the apathetic church. It is something that makes us completely comfortable with where we are and stops the growth. Whereas persecution goes hand in hand and is often the constant companion of a growing, healthy church. I wish that weren't the case. I was just, sharing earlier, because, this is I'm a historian. I love history. I'm an amateur historian. That's why all of our books are kind of telling stories and testimonies, not just of today's church, but, the forgotten pioneers of the faith from before. And so I've been really encouraged in the last couple of days on my morning walks, listening to the writings of Ignatius in the first century church. And Ignatius wrote these really powerful teachings that he had learned from John before being fed to lions. So he was given to lions. Polycarp gave this amazing sermon before the Romans set him on fire. The cool thing about him, and you can even look him up on Wikipedia, they will also say that in history, it shows that Polycarp wasn't killed by the fire. They actually had to kill him with a sword because he wasn't being consumed by the fire. So we're talking about like, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego type of craziness. But the reason we bring these guys up is that I wonder how many pastors would continue to be pastors today if it required their life. I wonder how many leaders and speakers and teachers today would continue being who they are if it required them to suffer persecution, intense death. Would they be willing to give up their life? There's one thing to be said when you have a comfortable life, and I like a comfortable life. I mean, I'm in a Western country. I'm in Northern Europe when I'm doing this podcast together with you. I have no needs. I ate very, very well this afternoon. I will go to bed in a very safe, comfortable bed tonight.
Yeah.
I'm in no way, marching myself out to fires to be consumed by the Romans or to be a snack for a couple of lions in an auditorium. I have no desire for that. But I do question if I would be the person that I am facing the kind of persecution of those that I get the privilege to serve beside. I have a brother that I'm serving with right now. I can't go into detail on this because we're in the middle of it, where he is suffering persecution, intense persecution that I can't imagine. And I wonder how long my faith would last, how much I would boast, how much I would be willing to do a podcast like this if I was suffering persecution. Yeah. So I think that unfortunately, brother, I think that there is something to be said of the positive impact and the teachings. I mean, the disciples of Jesus themselves had to go through persecution. Am I a better student than they were? I would say not. Am I smarter than them? Am I more clever than them? I would say no. So unfortunately, I think the same teaching apparatuses that were used with them might also have to be used on me.
Yeah. And there's a mindset that I've heard repeated, and it can sound like wisdom, but it's kind of a mindset that we prioritize safety, physical safety, like above everything, and if something is dangerous, then, God wouldn't ask you to do that. That's dangerous. God wouldn't tell you to go there. You could, you're breaking a law, or you're going to get arrested, or that's unwise. This concept of safety and wisdom have become so synonymous in, I think, a lot of churches and in a lot of conversations. And, even on a small scale, for example, in Portland, Oregon, if we do an event in Portland, Oregon, we are likely going to experience a mob of Antifa is going to show up. Now, how big the mob and what they do, is it just going to be, a sign that says we hate Nazis, or, what's it going to be? And we don't know what that looks like, but it's so interesting to me that even the prospect of the what if there might be a crowd that is a counter protest against some sort of event that we're doing in Portland, let's say, we get a lot of opinions from other Christians. Oh, you guys shouldn't do that. It's too dangerous. But this is where the church, I think, has backed down so often. And do I want to get punched in the face? No. Do I want to get attacked by a group of people? No, absolutely not, But what we are doing in some of these areas, even in a place like Portland, Oregon, there's so much darkness, there's so much perversity, there's so many things happening in the city, and no Christians are willing to go to the front lines of that. And then we often face the ridicule or persecution even from the church, even more so than other people, which is just crazy to me. But I'm saying this to me as someone who, I haven't experienced persecution myself. So it's easy to talk about these things as well when you haven't experienced it. But I do think that I do think it's so important for every Christian to listen to something like this and say, how can we come along? How can we support? Not everyone is going to be on the front lines in one of these countries, China, Iran, or wherever, but what can we do to support, whether that be, earnest prayer, intercession, financial giving, whatever we can do. Like, the church, I believe, needs to rally and get behind those that are on the front lines and are doing this stuff. And that's what I'm extremely passionate about this. And I think I've always been so drawn to not just Back to Jerusalem, but just to you, Eugene, personally, like as a friend, because I just like you guys are very, very different than any organization I've talked to, that I've encountered. And so I'm just so thankful for your example. And I know that you don't take it as like, personal accolades, but you guys are doing, incredible things. For those that are listening today, what would be the best way for people to connect with Back to Jerusalem or with you? I know there's many books. Like if you go to Amazon, for example, like you guys have a lot of books, read The Heavenly Man, but also, Eugene, you've written a lot of other books that are phenomenal. How can people connect with Back to Jerusalem?
Yeah, I mean, what you just said is really important when looking at Back to Jerusalem. You can connect with us on backtojerusalem.com. That's the best way. And there you'll be able to be linked. You can also look, my name, Eugene Bach. You can look me up on Amazon. You'll see a lot of the books. And I can't remember which founding father of the United States said this. I think it was like Patrick Henry or Samuel Adams. One of these guys said that anybody who would trade freedom for safety deserves neither. And I think that's very much gospel inspired. And I see that just really, really quick. One of the books that we are focused on writing right now, I'm just focused on writing. I've been at the University of London and they're deep diving in their archives, going through all these ancient letters of, missionaries from 300 years ago. And one of them blows me away. I would really encourage your listeners to look up. There was a missionary organization of a group of Christians that came to an understanding, just as what you said, like people that were not going to compromise anymore. In London in the 1700s, people were persecuted when they thought about missions. There was very much this idea that you need to let people, have their own religion, and, there's people are chosen from birth and all this other stuff. And there was a group that was called the London Missionary Society. I would highly recommend that your readers look them up. There's never been another organization like them. The London Missionary Society started and formed in the late 1700s. At the time, England had a lot of problems. The main focus for the nation was to maintain the Americas. America was in a revolutionary war at the time, and England was trying to maintain that. But this group of Christians said, you know what? We're not going to focus on that. We're not going to focus on politics. We're not going to focus on war. We're going to focus on preaching the gospel to the unreached people groups. And they got a boat, and it was called the Duff. And they put together this Duff, and they were criticized a lot because it was considered to be business and mixing business and mission and all this other stuff. Missionaries could not go on any ship to China, for instance, because they were all controlled by the East India Company, and it was against the law to take missionaries that would go and preach the gospel in China. So the only way that they could go, they had to go to America, then America go to China. It's really weird in the 1700s. So this mission organization by the name of London Missionary Society, they bought a boat called the Duff. And what was amazing is everybody criticized them. They put missionaries on there and they sent them out to these islands that had never been discovered before. They were discovered by Captain Cook, and then his assistant captain became a captain of the Duff. And they found these small islands in the Pacific. They dropped off missionaries and they decided we're going to come back every 6 months. Their very first trip, they were raided by pirates who took the ship and then ransomed the Christians on the ship. And the London Missionary Society went broke, spending all their money to get the Christians from that ship back. The missionaries that were dropped off never heard from them again. They were just sitting there waiting, like, when's the boat going to come back? And they never came back. And so everybody said, look, I told you they were wrong. These guys, they went against the grain. They went against practical thinking. They abandoned their safety. They followed the gospel of Jesus Christ. They followed the calling that God had given them, regardless of the criticism that mainly came from the church, but also came from others. the church kind of gloated and said, I told you, look, it was all a big flop. They lost everything. Never heard from those missionaries. And many of those missionaries went mad. Some of them were eaten by cannibals. But one was able to minister to a tribe member who became a believer. That believer became the chief of his tribe. The chief of his tribe then became a king of his country or his colony. And their entire country became Christian. That's the nation of Tahiti. And so Tahiti every year celebrates International Missions Day, the day that the Duff arrived at their island. It just, transformed a nation which looked like a failure from the beginning. But isn't that the gospel? Sacrificing our freedom in Christ for safety, I think, leads to incompetence, and it keeps us from breeding the gospel. It keeps the gospel kingdom from expanding. The gospel kingdom expands, I believe, through taking risks and trusting in God. When we choose to keep our mouths shut and do what the world tells us, or even try to be comfortable by not offending anybody like many Christians tell us, that is like putting a condom in our mouth. That's like a prophylactic for the gospel. The life-piercing energy of the gospel is stopped by you. And I've said this many times. I'll end on this if this is where you want to end. I've said this many times. I'll say it again, that lies are easily defeated by the truth. The truth is the enemy to lies. It will destroy lies every time. But lies are not the enemy of truth. Truth does not need to be protected. Lies need protection. It does not. The enemy of lies is truth. The enemy of truth is silence. That is the enemy of truth. And as Christians, we just can't remain silent.
Wow. That's a great way to end this conversation, Eugene. Thank you so much.
Praise God.
So thankful for your time. If you are listening to this podcast, go to backtojerusalem.com, check out their books, go to Amazon. And Eugene, I know you guys are traveling around. You guys do come to different states. You're speaking to different churches. If you can go and learn more about this organization, highly, highly recommend that you do that. Get involved in some way. They are doing amazing things. They're, as you've heard, they're like, we just scratched the surface of what they're doing. You guys are doing a lot more than that, even especially in the realm of business and all of that. So, so honored, Eugene. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thanks, brother. God bless you.
Yep. Talk soon.
Thanks for tuning in to the Contagious Faith Podcast. If this episode encouraged you, share it with a friend, leave a review, and don't forget, download the United Hive app today, where your faith becomes contagious.